Welcome to The Explainer. Today, we're diving into the psychology of a really fascinating and, let's be honest, often misunderstood dynamic. We're going to look at this source material to really understand the key drivers of female arousal within this specific relationship structure. Okay, so let's just kick things off with a really fundamental question. Now, of course, biology plays a huge role in arousal, but what we're really digging into here is the psychological context, our thoughts, our emotions, and maybe most importantly, the actual structure of our relationships.
And you know, what's so interesting is that for some women, the source material suggests that intense arousal isn't found by following the same old playbook. It's found by completely rewriting the rules, by challenging the very idea of desire, but doing it from inside the safety of a committed relationship. So to really get a handle on this, we're going to break it down into 4 key psychological pillars that the source material points to: agency, validation, novelty, and this really fascinating concept of reconnection.
All right, let's dive into our first pillar. The idea here is that a huge shift in the power dynamic, one that puts her choice and her pleasure front and center, can be an incredibly powerful aphrodisiac.
So at the heart of all this is something called sexual agency. Study after study shows this direct link. When women feel like they have total autonomous control over their sexual choices, their satisfaction and arousal just skyrocket. And it seems like this whole dynamic is basically designed to crank that feeling of control all the way up. And this quote, it just nails it. Think about it. In a lot of traditional setups, female pleasure can sometimes feel, well, like an afterthought, right? Here, it's the main event. Her desire is the engine driving the entire experience. And that can be an unbelievably liberating and arousing place to be. Now, this brings us to something really interesting that the source calls the permission paradox. You'd think, right, that if something isn't forbidden anymore, it would lose its thrill. But the twist here is that when a partner gives enthusiastic permission, it gets rid of the guilt, and it turns a potentially sneaky act into a deeply shared, intimate one. And paradoxically, that can be even more arousing. Okay, on to our second big idea. Let's look at how the psychology of being desired by more than one person can kick off this powerful self-reinforcing feedback loop. It's like a psychological amplifier.
So what's happening here taps into a really powerful psychological effect. You know how this works, right? When you hear something from a couple of different places, you start to really believe it. Well, in this situation, that powerful bit of information is simply, she is desirable. So here's how this crazy feedback loop actually plays out. First, you've got that direct, genuine desire from a new partner. But then, and this is the key part, it gets immediately amplified by her primary partner, who is turned on by the very fact that she's so desired. And it just creates this powerful cycle where one person's desire feeds the others, and the feeling of being wanted just spirals up, becoming incredibly intense. So, at the end of the day, it's way more than just, hey, someone thinks I'm attractive. It's this whole other level of validation. Her partner's arousal is literally triggered by her desirability to someone else. And that confirmation of her own sexual power, well, that's a huge part of her own arousal. All right, our third pillar. This one's all about shaking things up, breaking routine, and the power of fantasy. Now, we all know novelty is a big deal in sexual psychology, but here it's working on a few different levels. And the thing is, this idea of novelty isn't just one-dimensional. You've got the obvious physical stuff, a new person, new techniques, but there's also the psychological piece, that thrill of self-discovery, of exploring parts of your own sexuality that might have been dormant. And yeah, even with everyone's permission, there's still that little transgressive thrill, you know? That feeling of breaking a big social rule, which can be super exciting all by itself. And you know, this can totally flip this script on how a couple thinks about sex. A lot of times, traditional relationships can accidentally create a scarcity mindset, this feeling that sex is a limited resource you have to protect, which can create a lot of anxiety. According to the source, this can shift things to an abundance mindset, where pleasure isn't something to hoard, but an experience that can actually grow and expand. So what does all this add up to? Well, it's basically throwing out those old, tired scripts that so often paint female desire as passive or something that just responds. Instead, it carves out a space for a woman to be the active, assertive driver of her own pleasure. And that can be unbelievably empowering and arousing. And that brings us to our fourth and final pillar.
And honestly, this one might sound like a total contradiction at first. The idea that these outside experiences can actually lead to an even more intense, more powerful bond within the main relationship. So, a really key piece of the puzzle here is an emotion called compersion. You'll often hear it described as the exact opposite of jealousy. It's that feeling of getting genuine joy and, in this context, even arousal from seeing your partner happy and experiencing pleasure, even if you're not the direct source of it. And then there's this really cool contrast effect that the source talks about. It's like the excitement and the novelty of a new encounter can actually make the deep, secure intimacy you have with your primary partner feel even more special, even more valuable when you return to it. Each experience makes you appreciate the other one more. All of this often leads to something the source material calls a reclamation phase. The sex between the main couple right after one of these encounters is often described as being off the charts intense. It's driven by all these psychological factors we've been talking about, and it works to powerfully reaffirm that primary bond. So when you put it all together, what you see is that the arousal we're talking about here isn't just about one thing. It's the result of this really unique psychological framework that somehow manages to combine total opposites: deep security with thrilling adventure, and profound commitment with a real sense of freedom, all at the same time. And that really leaves us with a big, kind of provocative question to chew on. I mean, we usually think of what turns us on as just part of who we are, right? Something that's fixed. But what if it's not? The source material we've gone through today suggests that maybe the very structures we build for our relationships aren't just putting boundaries on our desires, they might actually be creating them.